Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Nana Akua, sitting in for Michelle. This is Dewbs and Co. So on today's show, with the revelation that the Liverpool bomber was a failed asylum seeker who had recently converted to Christianity, a growing trend from Muslim asylum seekers, some seeing it as a way of assisting them with their application, I'm asking, is it time that we got tougher on deportation? Then racism in sport, but how do we tackle it? In football, we've had players taking the knee, which I don't agree with. I don't see why players should need to make virtue signals whilst the authorities stay silent. Well, now the spotlight is on cricket, with former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq calling it institutionally racist. With huge vacancies in the care sector and the NHS about to follow suit with their no jab, no job policy, do we need to reconsider mandatory vaccination for frontline roles within the NHS? Then the government are planning to introduce fat camps for those aged 2 to 18 in an attempt to curb the spiralling numbers of obese children. What on earth is happening? There is no way I would allow my kids to get fat. We'll be discussing that later in the show. And the pandemic, of course, saw some go from fat to fit, but many went in the other direction. So are you sick and tired of the wellness agenda? 84-year-old smoker and painter David Hockney is. He's called it ridiculous and bought a load of Board of Wellness beer mats, which features cigarettes and ashtrays. That's all coming up. Now, with me tonight throughout the show will be filmmaker Kerry Dingle, author James Bloodworth, and environmental policy researcher Laurie Laybourne-Langton. All of that is to come tonight on Dewbs & Co. with me, Nana Akua. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. Good evening. These are your latest GB News headlines this hour. And in breaking news, 2 arrests have been made in West London by the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command. The arrests aren't linked to the taxi explosion in Liverpool, but 2 men aged 21 and 19 have been detained under the Terrorism Act and remain in custody. We'll bring you more on that, of course, as more detail comes to us. The Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party have separately called for members of Parliament to stop working as paid political consultants or lobbyists. Boris Johnson has written to the Speaker of the House, calling for an update to the MP's Code of Conduct, saying that those who prioritise interests other than their constituents should be investigated. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has also called for similar restrictions on politicians, but he said Boris Johnson had been dragged kicking and screaming to his new position.
Under no illusion, the Prime Minister's only done this because his back was against the wall, because we, the Labour Party, have put down a binding vote for tomorrow. So this is a significant victory for the Labour Party. And I rather hope that all my press conferences are this successful, that whilst I'm making a demand of the Prime Minister, he concedes, caves in.
Sir Keir Starmer. The former Yorkshire county cricketer Azim Rafiq says racism in cricket is worse than it is in real life. He's appeared before MPs to discuss allegations of institutional racism at his former club, Yorkshire County Cricket Club. An investigation by Yorkshire concluded Mr Rafiq had been a victim of racial harassment and bullying, but no one had been disciplined. Mr Rafiq told the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee that abuse in the club just went unchecked. The Scottish Government will consider expanding its coronavirus vaccine passport scheme from December the 6th. Nicola Sturgeon has told MSPs that a final decision will be made next Tuesday on whether or not to expand the scheme to cover pubs, cinemas and theatres. Vaccine passports were introduced at the start of October. They currently apply to nightclubs and other adult entertainment venues.
Also considering whether an expansion of the scheme to cover more settings would be justified and prudent given the current state of the pandemic. I can confirm that the kinds of settings that might be in scope would be indoor cinemas, theatres and some other licensed and hospitality premises.
A Liverpool MP says her Muslim constituents are facing racial hatred after Sunday's terror attack. It follows police naming the bombing suspect who died in the blast as 32-year-old Imad al-Swalmin. The terrorist threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. Minister for Security and Borders, Damien Hines, told GB News people should be as vigilant as ever.
If you see something that doesn't look right, something that makes you suspicious about something, just to go that extra mentally, go that extra distance to say, yeah, I should report that. And if it turns out to not be significant, then nothing's been lost.
Manchester City footballer Benjamin Mendy has been charged with 2 additional counts of rape. The 27-year-old is now facing 6 counts and 1 of sexual assault, which relate to 4 people over the age of 16. He's due to appear at Stockport Magistrates Court tomorrow. NHS leaders are calling for cash bonuses for social care staff to stop them resigning this coming winter. They've suggested a £500 incentive from the government to keep workers from moving into hospitality sectors, to supermarkets or to firms like Amazon over the Christmas period. That comes after the requirement of care home workers to be double vaccinated in a sector that has over 100,000 vacancies. And for Star Wars fans, there's a chance to get your hands on an original poster being sold at auction in December. Fans are going to bid on the largest collection of alternative film posters to be sold in Europe, worth, it said, more than £250,000. More than 750 pieces of rare artwork will be up for grabs at the auction. The Empire Strikes Back poster expected to make £8,000. That's all your news. I'm back in an hour.
Good evening, this is Dewbs and Co. I'm Nana Akua. Now, with me until 7, my panel, Laura Dodsworth, writer, photography and filmmaker, author and journalist Nietzsche Hodgson, and Alan Miller, co-founder of the campaign group. Oh, I think they've changed. These are different people from the first time. Let's try again. Let's do it again, shall we? So joining me are my panel. I've got Kerry Dingle. Kerry, yeah. Thank you. She's a filmmaker. Also James Bloodworth, who's an author, and Laurie Laybourne, a Langton, an environmental policy maker. I thought, who are these people that suddenly appeared on my autocue? Right. Also, as ever, I want to know your thoughts. Get in touch with me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or why not tweet me? On Twitter, I'm at NanaAkua1. That's NanaAkua1, or you can go at GB News. Now, the details from the terror attack in Liverpool keep emerging, but it's clear that efforts to establish a motive and why the attacker converted to Christianity are still ongoing. We now know the identity of the man behind the bombing and that his application for asylum in the UK was apparently rejected. Now, with the latest developments from Liverpool, here's our home and security editor, Mark White.
Well, we are now starting to get a fuller picture of the Liverpool suicide bomber, Imad al-Swalmin. He had come to this country several years ago and claimed asylum. That initial asylum application was turned down in 2014. Now, a couple who had effectively adopted this young man have been speaking to the media. They said that he was destitute at the time they took him into their home. And in 2017, he converted to Christianity. Now, there have been some concerns about that process, as a number of asylum seekers have adopted that as pretty much a tactic for trying to enhance their application for asylum. But the couple in this case say that they were convinced that he was genuine in his conversion to Christianity. Well, of course, he blew himself up on Sunday before he could get out of that vehicle and we think head into the women's hospital here. There are concerns about the vetting process surrounding asylum seekers. You remember the Parsons Green tube bombing in September of 2017. Well, that was an attack that was perpetrated by a failed asylum seeker, and the authorities here in the UK are concerned that a number of asylum seekers who come across the channel don't have any documentation because they're told by the people smugglers to throw it away, to make it more difficult for the authorities to return them to the country of origin. And that in turn makes it much more difficult for UK authorities to delve into the background of these asylum seekers to determine whether or not they pose any threat, any risk to national security here in the UK.
Right, so let's pick up on the point about his failed attempt to seek refuge here. In 2019, a study highlighted that fewer than half of those whose applications were rejected were actually deported. Panel, I want to know, is it time that we get tougher on failed asylum seekers? Right, I'm going to start with Kerry.
I'd say no, actually, because I think 99.9% of asylum seekers don't flee a crap situation, try and get into the UK in order to bomb us. I don't think they're out to get us at all. I think we're a bit obsessed with migrants. There have been asylum seekers, absolutely, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about it, who've committed atrocities. But I think that's got everything to do with the way we now assimilate asylum seekers into a multicultural grievance culture, which basically says Britain's horrible, you know, we're all nasty, racist, evil people, and that harbours this idea of grievance and entitlement. I think that's the dangerous stuff, whether it's homegrown terrorists or asylum seekers.
Well, I'll have to sort of say, you think that we're obsessed with this whole thing of immigrants, you're saying refugees, people seeking asylum. But I think it's perfectly reasonable if somebody comes to this country, then they go through the system, if they've been rejected as an asylum seeker, to be then sent back to their place, the place that they've come from, because that's the system. So we need a system that will reject certain people. And actually, on this occasion, it looks like that perhaps he shouldn't have been here.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's an institutional failure to deport people who have failed to qualify for asylum here. I mean, I agree with Kerry's point that most people who come here are fleeing from terrorism. They're not coming here to inflict terrorism. But if someone has failed to, be processed through the asylum system, failed to gain asylum here, the government needs to keep tabs on them and then to deport them if that's the course of action. Because at the moment, people seem to be disappearing into the system. I think the mental health issue, though, is a bigger issue with this person than the asylum factor, because this was someone who had been sectioned before for wielding a knife in the street. It seemed to be someone who is suffering delusions. I'm not sure it's the fact they were asylum seeker. It's so interesting, the fact they were also failed by the mental health establishment.
Well, I hear you, but I take the point that they shouldn't actually have been in this country in the first instance.
I agree.
Anyway.
I agree with that.
So it's not really, whilst it is our responsibility because that person is here, if you have been sent back and then you are still here and then you are found brandishing a knife.
But it sounds like he should have still been sectioned, and not why was he let back into the community?
Just been sent back.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things here that we need to separate out. There is the extreme case that we find ourselves in, the tragic case with this particular incident, right? Where there are clear potential failures. I mean, it's an ongoing investigation, so we should be careful about what we're saying. But potential clear failures with the system that should have spotted certain problems, no matter the status of the person, that it wouldn't have led to the situation we're in now. I would caution that we should use this to completely colour our overall perspective on, say, asylum seeking and migration, which is, and I can see why you would, this is a very extreme case. In some ways, it may seem very black and white in what's happened there. But it's already exceedingly tough for people to be able to get into this country. There are lots of rules and other things that can stop them from doing so. And how tough that is, in fact, in some ways, is driving this criminalisation of people getting into the UK, some of whom have a right under international law because they're fleeing certain situations. And that can drive them into the arms of the people traffickers that we're often talking about.
But let's rewind here. He is a failed asylum seeker who came to this country and was supposed to go back, right? So if we work from that premise, because yes, there are people who claim asylum who definitely are fleeing persecution. I don't know whether it's the majority or the minority or genuine asylum seekers. I couldn't really make that comment because I don't know. There might be a load of people who are just coming here because they think, actually, this is a soft touch and we'll come here. I don't know. But there are definitely some who are fleeing persecution, for sure. But once you come to this country and then we've worked out that perhaps you shouldn't be here, when we then say you need to go back, this person was told that they'd failed it in 2014. They've been here for another 7 years. And then they were able to brandish knives and then eventually inflict terror. And thankfully, nobody was harmed or damaged. And I sort of come back to your point about the whole thing about this image of us being racist in this country because we want somebody who should have gone back to actually be sent back. I would say that we are just simply trying to maintain a certain level of a standard within this country. Anybody who doesn't meet it or the criteria to be here should be sent back.
I think it's good that we have standards. In fact, I wish we had higher standards in terms of encouraging people to become responsible citizens. And I think that's what citizenship is about. I don't think asylum is the same thing, and I do think we are fetishising migrants. I don't want people to drown, as we're seeing with,
and
I don't want to see people 25 people a week, sometimes 50, being deported from Stansted either. I know some of those people. They are really good people, and we have a crappy asylum system. Look, we have 11,000 Afghans legitimately come in, still languishing in hotels with no paperwork, no right to work. I would say make illegals legal, let them work, let them earn their place.
Hold on.
Those that are here, not those who've committed criminal offences, those that are, or who need to be sectioned, but those that are here, let them work, earn their place in society and prove their worth. Instead of what we do is we let people languish, we don't do the paperwork, we forge a grievance culture.
Yeah, OK, but we don't send anyone back, really. And those
well, we do, actually.
Well, less than half.
And a lot of people shouldn't be going back.
Less than half. Well, you say that.
Well, look, there's a labour shortage that everyone's whinging about. I'd be quite happy for recruiters to go over to the crappy new jungle camp in Dunkirk and, you know, recruit some of the really talented people there.
OK, but that's another...
And the reason we've got all of these people coming over, 23,000 from France, is because France treats migrants like crap.
James.
We don't want to be like that, do we?
Just refrain from the word.
I do agree with Kerry's point that we need to reform the asylum system. It needs to have more resources, it needs to be better staffed, so we process some of these claims much faster. I mean, the Afghan point is an obviously good one in that we have all these people who did help us in Afghanistan. They're now languishing in the asylum system. But I think we do have to maintain public support for immigration and asylum in this country. We do have to deport people who have failed to qualify for asylum.
And we're failing to do that as well. And actually, there is the question of converting from Islam to Christianity, which there are some who say that is a tactic, and it is clear there is a tactic that people use to show that they'd be persecuted if they went back as Muslim or whatever the deal is. But that is a tactic.
Yeah, I mean, Britain is really not a soft touch when it comes to being able to get in the country, right? And
it's not a soft touch for what, sorry?
It's not a soft touch. It's not easy to get into the UK, right? It's not a very easy thing.
Why do you say?
So
what element isn't easy? Is it because you have to cross the channel, or is it the journey? What part? It's
very difficult for you to have the kind of documentation that would enable you, even under very legitimate circumstances, to be able to come into the UK. And there's this phrase that people use, like crimmigration, where you're basically criminalising immigration, often at times legitimate, including asylum seekers. And so what that does is it makes it much harder for people who may have a very distinct reason, because of laws that Britain has signed, because we want to respect human rights, to come into the UK, which then pushes them into this situation where they seek more desperate measures, like going over the channel, like tactically changing what their religion may be. And what that does is it pushes us into this quite dangerous situation where we're constantly escalating, so that the immigration itself becomes more criminalised, which means more criminals are involved in the process of people trafficking, and it ratchets up this very dangerous situation for us. This case, and we'll see what happens with the investigation, may be a very extreme thing that people miss stuff, and that should be dealt with, right? But the wider context here is that the way that people move into this country is not like a Nigel Farage YouTube video. People don't whiz up in a swanky motorboat, run straight into a five-star hotel where they get to sit and be pampered for the rest of their time.
I'll take slight exception to you using that as an analogy, actually. That's a little bit unfair, is it really? Because what Nigel has highlighted is the reality of what's going on and the migrants coming. And we actually, GBNews were actually the first to be reporting the huge numbers that have been coming over last week. And it is an important thing. And I think what I kind of object to is this kind of rhetoric that it's there's some sort of racism going on when you're actually looking at a situation and wanting to find a solution, but you have to admit that there are elements of it that aren't working. And one of them is that when you have been told that you have failed your claim, you are sent back. That's fair enough, isn't it? So why on earth are we not sending people back when they've failed?
I'm not saying that there's anything racist about wanting to have a proper discussion and policy on immigration. I don't think that's racist particularly. In fact, I think the people who shout racism are the ones who've helped create a grievance culture. That's my point. And along with the politics of multiculturalism, which says we're all different, we can't get on, blah, blah, blah. I think the reason people languish is, A, because you have a completely, messed up, slow asylum procedure. I think lots of people who are perfectly legitimate and good people, I know plenty of them that I've worked with, some of whom I've helped get citizenship, they have huge difficulties and endless processes. And look at what happened to the Windrush people. I know that's a really good example, and it's real.
But I think that's conflating, and we're going backwards.
Well, it's not, That's only a few years ago.
Look, that's another situation. It's not what's going on now.
Well, no, it is what's going on. People, obviously, what's happening, people who shouldn't be deported are being, and people who should be aren't being.
Kerry, sorry, the Windrush was a totally different situation. Okay?
Why?
In the sense that, really, what should have happened for those people within the Windrush, they should have been given their citizenship, and they weren't, OK?
Yeah, and then some of them got deported.
Yeah, but this is people who, but they were brought here, weren't they? These people have come across.
No, some of them weren't brought here. Some of them came over to join relatives and then got deported.
OK, well, let's just, we're not going to split hairs. Let's just stick to the actual events that are on hand now and the question, which is when somebody has failed asylum, they should be sent back. Would you not agree with that?
I don't agree with asylum legislation, actually. My point is make them legal. I'm thinking make asylum seekers, people who are here, yes, unless they're committed crimes, make them legal, let them work and earn their place in British society.
So don't you think
Why not? Migrants made America.
OK, I'll answer the question. Why not? Because if everyone who comes here you then just make legal, then you create a system where you're encouraging even more migration, which could end up as uncontrolled migration. And we can't even handle what we have at the moment. So we need to do this in a better way. I absolutely 100% agree with that. But just making the whole thing, let anybody who comes in, they can just stay. I mean, that can't be right. And it's actually not fair on those who have come with certain skills that are coming to migrate for economic reasons, but they're going through the actual proper process.
Well, let's have a referendum on it then.
Well, I mean, I think there might be a question mark over whether this person should have been refused asylum in the first place, because it seems he's from Syria.
Well, they were brandishing
and I'm not sure anyone should be... Yeah, there is that, but I'm not sure anyone should be deported.
OK, they're brandishing a knife. You should
Syria is a dictatorship which has murdered 500,000 people. I mean, I'm not sure anyone should be deported there right now.
But the whole point of it is if they failed through the process that we have, if they failed through the process that we have, which goes through and works out who should be and who shouldn't, then if they failed, they should go back. Or is your tactic to question the process so that eventually they can come in?
No, I think, if someone fails the process as the process is now, they should be deported. But I think we should reform the process. I think the process is something clearly wrong with it if people are being sent back to Syria.
This is almost like the whole Brexit vote. If you didn't win, let's change the system and do it so that you can win.
Let's have a referendum on immigration.
Oh, not another referendum.
Yeah,
not another one.
Because people aren't allowed to be part of this debate.
Well, what would the referendum be for?
Priti Patel makes noises.
What would the question be in the referendum?
Should there be limits on the number of people allowed into the UK?
Well, that's obviously a yes. Of course, there should be limits of the. I mean, that's.
Well, let's have a debate about it.
Well, it'd be 99. What do you think? OK, let's try it out. Let's try it out on the panel. Should there be limits on the people that come to the UK? The amount of people, yes or no?
What the amount of people
the
that
number.
come to the
Should there be a limit?
It depends what.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
But
Should there be a limit?
It depends what that limit
No,
is. Right?
okay.
If you said
yeah,
it's
but
5
the question,
people,
we need to move
because
on. So
I
just answer the question: should there be a limit for immigration?
there would
the
need to be
numbers?
specific circumstances of what the number should be and what the
So
types
there
of
should be a limit.
should
Yes. Is that a yes or a no?
It's too complex to give a yes
No, but
or no
you'd have a
answer.
number of people that you'd like to immigrate.
Too complex
She said that's
to give
the
a
question.
yes or no answer because
but that's the question. I'm going on to the question. Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be some ceiling on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this would be like Brexit, 50-50-ish. Right, coming up. Is it time to kick out racism in sport on a national scale rather than talking about it constantly without any resolution or getting down on a knee and nothing actually happening? Join us after this short break.
On Brazier at 8, 12 years ago, I interviewed Libya's Colonel Gaddafi and asked him which of his officials killed police constable Yvonne Fletcher. Today we got an answer. Also, a former MP says asylum seekers convert to Christianity to prevent their deportation. Was the Liverpool hospital bomber one of them? And after days of tense standoff, boiling point on the border as migrants hurl rocks at Polish guards. That's Brazier from 8.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
If you've just tuned in, wherever you've been, you've missed the right old scrap. This is Dewbs & Co. with me, Nana Akua. Now, next tonight, the issue of racism is dominating the headlines again today, following claims that English cricket faces an institutional problem. Now, those words came from former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq, who's been giving evidence to the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee following his experience at his old club, which is at the centre of the racism scandal. Have a listen to this.
He went past a couple of men with beard and it was like, oh, is that your dad? If we go past a corner shop, or does your uncle own this? Everyone saw it. But because the institution and the environment, it becomes such a norm in there that I don't think anyone thought there was anything wrong with it. And that's probably why some people don't even remember it.
So, panel, we're hearing about this across the whole of sport a lot, aren't we? I mean, it's not just cricket. We've heard football people taking the knee. So is it time that we have a national crackdown to sort it out once and for all? Kerry, I'm going to come to you.
Well, we might actually agree, Nana,
my
which
goodness.
is surprising. No, we don't need a crackdown. I don't think we've got this massive problem. And I think saying it's in relation to cricket, saying it's institutionalised, whenever you hear something's been institutionalised, what they mean is it's everywhere. And I don't believe it's everywhere. And I don't believe it's inherent either in some process, which is also what institutionalised tends to mean. In fact, I think that saying it's institutionalised, and I'm sure that's not what your man means, is letting the racists who need to be named and shamed, the racist rotten apples, because there are rotten apples, off the hook, because you're just generalising and saying it's absolutely everywhere. And when it comes to saying it's true of football, I think the obsession with racism in football is actually just attacking working-class fans, and it's a class thing that's going on there.
Laurie?
I think in this particular case, the institutional element of it is the fact that the player was exposed to certain situations, and the institution he was in, that has a duty of care over him as effectively, I guess, an employee, did not provide him with the support that he needed at all stages. It's a problem in the locker room, it's a problem on the training ground, it's a problem in the boardroom, in the case of this, right? And whether or not we think that that's happening everywhere, in every club, in every sport, in every single player who isn't white, is one thing, but to recognise that there are instances that have happened time and time again, and more are becoming apparent as people feel more confident and able to come forward, which I think is a really good development recently. We've got to make sure we're taking it very seriously and making the changes where that stuff couldn't happen again. I mean, if anything, beyond elements of racism, you're getting in the way of the development of exceptional players that we can all enjoy in a sport that brings us together, like we saw in the case of football this summer gone.
Well, what about Kerry's comment? And I think she makes a very good point, that when you start saying it's institutionally racist, then what you're actually doing is allowing a lot of people who are racist to hide under cover. I want to know who is being racist, what are their names, single them out and let them have a word with me. Why on earth are we saying, oh, it's a whole... Yes, there is a practice that seems to be happening here, which is almost a practice of people are just blind to they just close their eyes to it and actually join in with it, because actually calling it out would be worse, because they might then be victimised, so people are hiding. But it is a culture, but I wouldn't say that it would be an institution, because there are individuals doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with Kerry's point as well about there being a double standard when it comes to social class between, say, football and cricket, or even golf. So football's been under the spotlight for 30 years about racism, and in recent times it's been racism coming from fans directed at players. And the football clubs have levied, stiff penalties on people who've been found to be doing that. But this in cricket...
What, the fans doing it?
The fans being banned from
so the fans,
life bans from the clubs, for example. But this in cricket, this seems much more serious. This isn't some fans shouting it from the terraces. This is within the clubs, within the dressing rooms. This seems far worse. And it feels like we haven't paid attention to this, because there is this classist attitude that racism is something that working class people do, whereas a middle class game like cricket is not such an issue.
No, because from somebody who's been the victim of racism on many occasions, which I certainly don't allow people to behave in that manner, and I will call it out at every stage and any stage. This is, to me, is actually that there are individuals who are being racist, and they are not. There is no support for the player who is being attacked by the people around them, and in fact the bosses and the people who run the clubs, and so it's an enabling process. And if you look at it in football as well, what's happening in football is that yes, the fans initially there was a big thing with fans being racist, and other parts of the world that is definitely a problem. But what about FIFA? What about UEFA? Why is it down to the fans to take a knee, which, again, I do not agree with, because that is putting the pressure on the players? When if I came to work and somebody racially abused me, they should be out of here like a shot.
FIFA and they're coming, are useless,
yeah, and they're coming to work, which is their work, and nobody's doing anything about it. So, to me, this is people enabling it. It's not necessarily an institution. There are individuals who are not doing anything.
I think you're right, Nana, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is that the way in which the policymakers and the NGOs who are obsessed with this and the campaigners tend to target the racists is they do see it as nasty, working-class, bigoted white men. That's how they see it, as opposed to your point, which is let's call out, name and shame the individual protagonists. And I think the reason a lot of these things are now coming out, we should also be honest and recognise, is because things are so much better than they have ever been. Britain is far less racist than it has ever been. I was in Workers Against Racism in the late 70s and early 80s. We used to sit in the homes of Asian families who were having shit put through their letterbox, bricks through their windows, and they couldn't walk their kids.
We do apologise for that language, really, but you are
I
referring
don't know what to call it, poo.
She's referring to faeces, by the way.
Faeces through the letterbox, and they couldn't walk their kids to school. We don't have anything like that anymore. It's incomparable. In fact, I think people now feel more comfortable, thankfully, about naming and shaming. So let's just do that and not say football or cricket are all racist sports.
Well, I think as well, I think the difference as well, what you're pointing out is just direct, immediate, obvious, aggressive racism. But then you can have the covert stuff that I think actually is probably more it's kind of exchanged from the obvious aggressive stuff to a covert level of racism. But it is still individuals causing it. So if these individuals were called out and people didn't sort of quietly allow it to happen and then go along with it and enable it, then we wouldn't end up with this.
But so yeah, I kind of half agree with what you're saying there. People still exist though within decision-making structures, within organisations
but they're
that
racist.
themselves have
people who are doing
cultures
enabling are the racists, aren't they?
Yeah, but totally. But in the case of this, there was an interesting part of the testimony I was listening to earlier where he was saying the fact that some of the players who bore witness to this, right, who maybe themselves weren't directly racially abusing the player in question, they didn't remember what was going on, isn't just because they happen to be forgetful people.
They're scared.
It's also scared. Right, which is partly about being part of a culture where, and he said it himself when he was doing his testimony, where it's so usual that you just forget about the fact that it happened and stuff. But we also have to make sure that within institutions, clubs, leagues, other elements of sport, we have within the institutions the certain mechanisms within them where certain cultures, the behaviours of individuals, but also cultures are not allowed to persist. And that's something that's about individuals, but also
solve these kind of problems with a process or a policy. It's not about a process. It's about people who make these boards, who run these outfits and all the rest of it. And actually, he did name a couple of people, in fact, and then that was all kind of... They slightly backed off on that, the committee, and that was a bit of the hearing I heard. And I'm saying, no, actually, let's call them out big time and make life pretty difficult for them.
If people thought that as you said, there are those around, because I think there's actually a level of unfairness for those who are maybe white, who actually don't subscribe to this culture, but they're in it because they know that if they say anything, then unfortunately they then will be victimised themselves, and they're not prepared to do that. And I do understand that, but that is because there is no way of telling off or reprimanding those who are behaving in this manner. So if individuals are called out, if it were the other way round and the person who's racist is called out, this wouldn't be happening. This wouldn't be happening at all, and it's time for racism in sport to be called out, the individuals perpetrating this, instead of actually hiding under a label of institutionalised racism, because there are individuals doing this.
But that's got to come from the fans, from people involved in cricket, not some policy from on high, either from the boards or from government or from campaigners. I think that's a disaster.
Well, I mean, and there's laws against racism, so I'm not quite sure how it's allowed to carry on. We're moving on, though, to this no jabs, no jobs. We've been hearing it for a while, haven't we? Yes, it's a big thing, and as I've been saying since the start, those people working in social care or the NHS will have to make a decision on whether they stay or go by getting vaccinated. But a new consensus is highlighting a so-called recruitment crisis. 48% of the consultant positions weren't filled last year. And when you look at some of the areas in particular, like the Midlands and Wales, the problem is apparently much bigger. So with that in mind, does the government need to rethink their jab policy to avoid a winter crisis? Right, James, I think I'll start with you.
No, I mean, I don't think if you work in a frontline health or social care role that you shouldn't be vaccinated. I think there's a duty of care to the people you're looking after. I worked in social care in 2016 when I was researching a book. The reason why there's not many people wanting to work in social care is because the treatment carers receive is appalling. It's terrible pay, 0 hours contract, very long hours, a very difficult job. There was a 25% turnover of staff when I was working in care, and the average job is about 15%. So
now, how long ago was that when you were working?
This was 2016, so it was. There are even more problems now. So I mean,
5 years ago.
Yeah, so I mean, Brexit has meant there are fewer Eastern Europeans working in care. and you've had the COVID situation, so fewer people want to work in that sector. I think there are far bigger problems than just blaming it on people not taking the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't go into the pandemic with a health and social care sector that was purring along nicely and full of resources and bed capacity and staff. There were thousands upon thousands of unfilled nursing positions as we went into the pandemic when we needed nurses to care for people in the beds. We had spent a decade, or the government had spent a decade, demoralising staff.
This is very nice scene setting, but what about no jab, no job?
Well, it's like frontline clinicians, for the sake of their patients and for themselves, need to be jabbed. And we could focus on this particular touch point right now. You could say no jobs, or you could allow them to have jobs. They still need to be jabbed. Or we could talk about what's actually led to the problem we're facing now, which is over a decade of underinvestment, of demoralising staff, and just generally not be giving people the right conditions and pay. And surprise, surprise, there aren't enough people, there's a high level of turnover, and we're in a really bad situation.
So no jab, no job.
I think you should be jabbed if you're working on the front line, absolutely. But I don't think that's the issue. I think it's performative. And I think this is a really authoritative, dictatorial move by the government, because over 90% of health and care workers are jabbed. So what are we talking about here? And this idea that 100,000 people are going to leave the NHS and care work to go and work for Amazon, that's the way it's reported, because of the vaccine. No, they're leaving because the money's rubbish.
Well,
it's not a great job. I'm not saying that Amazon... I mean, if people actually leave to work for Amazon, that should tell you something.
Yeah,
and it certainly isn't about the vaccine.
Well, I mean, you know, there's some people would say, well, it's a very good job. I mean, you know, and there's the pay in some
For who?
things.
For consultants?
No,
and
I'm
doctors?
talking about going to work for people like Amazon and stuff like that.
Some of them, yeah.
The money's a lot better, isn't it? And so people are going with the money. But the point is, what do you think of the premise of no jab, no job? So, for example, for NHS workers,
I said it's performative. I think this is just an authoritative, big shout by the government to say, you evil people, when they singularly failed to take up and argue through with people why they should have the vaccine. I meet...
Oh, no, come on.
No, I'm sorry.
Surely people by now know why they should take the
I'm afraid
vaccine.
I meet teenagers and older women who tell me everything from... there was fetal matter involved in the creation of the vaccine.
Oh, goodness.
People are really freaked on safety. Pregnant women think at a certain stage of their pregnancy it's unsafe. We need medics and people to go through all of these objections and challenge them, not pose with vaccine passports, no jabs, no jobs,
but how much
or Austria, lock them up.
Hold on, how much time do you give it, though? You've already explained to people why they should have the
when
jab.
did you hear anyone go through those arguments?
I've heard the arguments 1,000 times. I've heard the arguments 1,000 times.
We shouldn't even be having this conversation, right? The government should have been doing two things. One, in the nearer term around the pandemic, supporting health and social care staff to get jabbed if they're in the minority who may not have had that so far. We should also be in a situation where over the last decade, prior to the pandemic, because it wasn't hard to predict that a pandemic was coming, the government had invested in health and social care. And it really is about, I mean, this guy here knows more about this. This is a unique confluence of experiences he's had. It is a bad sign when people in social care are going and working in Amazon warehouses instead of working in social care.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in an Amazon warehouse and in social care during
this
research.
This guy's got all of the research, he's got it all.
The social care was the hardest job I did because you're looking after people, you're dealing with people, you're doing palliative care on people, you're visiting people when they're on their last legs very often, when they're close to dying, and it's very emotionally hard as well as physically tiring. You're working 12-hour days, you're not getting proper breaks, you're getting paid less than the minimum wage because when you drive around and spend your petrol, you don't get reimbursed for that. It's one of the hardest jobs I've ever done, and yet, as one carer put it to me, we're treated like glorified cleaners, she said. Well, and this is why there's a shortage of workers in social care, not because of the vaccine.
Well, so we leave it there then, because it seems to me that it's not the vaccine, and to me it makes perfect sense, right, that somebody should be vaccinated, especially if you're looking after the most vulnerable and those who are more susceptible to COVID.
But it's not the issue, no.
Yeah.
It's not the reason they're leaving.
But so you think the government is kind of a smokescreen for the reality of the situation?
Well,
which
I
is
just think
the job itself is...
It's the job itself and their incapacity to deal with people's objections. Otherwise, it's not just crazies, anti-vax crazies that are coming out with this stuff. It's reasonable people, and you're like, hello, where did that come from?
Some of them don't sound that reasonable to me when I listen to some of the things they have to say.
Well, yeah, but we need to challenge those things. And I think if you don't, then you're basically saying that you're you're weak. You know, if you have to resort to authoritative measures like no jab, no job, or vaccine passports or lockdowns, you're basically saying, I can't persuade you.
Well, they shouldn't, to be honest, I don't think they should need to be persuaded. It should be clear and obvious to them as to why they should have the jab, but God knows why they won't. Well, listen, still, there's plenty to come. We'll be discussing whether all obese children should be sent to the new NHS fat camps. And are you bored of wellness? We'll see you after this short break.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs & Co. with me, Nana Akua. Now, another story that's caught my eye today is the brand new fat camps for kids that are being set up by the NHS. 15 clinics will be set up right across England and will offer 1,000 severely overweight 2 to 18-year-olds, therapists, dietitians, social workers, paediatricians and all that kind of thing to help them lose weight. Now, it will come at a cost of £6 million a year, and some would argue it's needed, especially if 1 in 5 children are leaving primary school obese. Well, it's got me thinking, should we send every severely overweight child to these so-called fat camps? I've got to start with Kerry on this again. I can't help it. I always want to speak to you.
Well, I put on a huge amount of weight over lockdown, and I wouldn't like to be an 11-year-old that's as fat as I am. So I've got no problem with fat camps or boot camps or action camps or any camps that get young people working as a team and up and out there. But sadly, that's not what this is. You look at these, and a huge amount of it is, you know, therapeutic, why are you fat, understanding what makes you eat and all this. And I've seen this happen. Yeah. And it's more of this grievance, you know, it's not my fault, whatever, rather than encouraging schools to put PE back on the agenda. I've met teenagers who've don't know how to swim, lots of them, never been to a swimming pool, or all of those things that might make us a bit more healthy. And the government can't whinge about this. They did lock us up for 1.5 years. So I wish they'd just get out of the fridge and our fridges and get on with running the country instead of setting up some more slightly cranky schemes that pay therapists a lot.
Well, something has to be done there, James. Do you not think?
I mean, I disagree to an extent with Kerry. I'm not necessarily opposed to this idea. I think that obesity, severe obesity like this, complex issues lie behind it often. So it can be things like depression, can be emotional issues, can lead to that. I have ADHD. When I was younger, I used to binge eat. It's something very common to people with ADHD. It's like a coping strategy, basically. So I think sometimes there are underlying issues that aren't helped by, say, shaming people, and something like this could help. But I also wonder, why are these kids not being restricted by their parents in terms of what they eat? So why are they just being allowed to eat anything? I feel like
the parents are also fat, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, but I feel like the parents should, even if that's the case, I feel like the parents should at least take more care to restrict what their kids have access to.
I sort of slightly think it's a bit abusive, really, if you allow your kids to get in that state. I mean, I would never have my kids do that. My daughter, I mean, she's young, she's lovely. If she started to put on weight, I'd make sure she stopped taking that bus and make her walk to school.
So I agree with James's point about acute cases, which I'm sure that these camps are related to. There is definite potential to help people. Doing it across the population shouldn't be something on the agenda. I don't think it is, mainly because kids are not greedier than they were 50 years ago, nor has something biologically happened to humans to make them desire more food. But what has happened is we've created what doctors call an obesogenic environment. And this basically means the availability of certain foods and the ability to have certain physical activity has been reduced relative to what is best for people, right? And there's a particular class element to this as well, because the poorer you are, you find yourselves in situations where it may be even harder to gain access to the right kinds of foods, to the physical activity that you need as well. So to deal with this,
how can if you're not that wealthy, how can you be buying so much food and eating so much? Look,
but it's not necessarily about volume of food; it's about types of food.
Yes,
right?
that's true. That is true.
And
I'm sorry.
But it's about how wonderful.
It is about volume, because if you eat a little bit of something bad, it's not. No.
If you go down,
I listen to you. Listen, it is about volume, because if you eat a load of rubbish food, lots of it, that is volume, then you're likely to get fat. So if you eat a little bit of rubbish food, then you're probably not going to get fat. So it is about
calorie-dense food. So you can eat a lot of healthy food and not much unhealthy.
Well, that's true.
Not much fatty food, and you still put on more weight
That's
over that.
a different thing, though, because you said that it's not about volume, and it is about volume. That's a huge part of it.
It's not just about volume. We can often think with a bit sure, but it's about the access to it. It's not like people are going into supermarkets and sort of buying huge amounts of food, some of it's that's healthy, some of it's not healthy. It's the general availability of food that's nutritionally sufficient for people, right? That gives them a balanced diet, that means they're not having too many calories and things.
We have a fantastic array of food now available.
Exactly.
We're healthier, we're better off than ever. We have become more lazy, more couch potato. Kids live on their phones, they watch TV, they don't do the physical activity. And I think the problem is on both sides of this argument is there is parent blaming. You know, we already have lunch boxes being snooped in by teachers and biscuits. Well, they are.
It's true.
And I think it's pretty outrageous, because it says parents are all evil giving their kid a piece of cake or something. And now we're going to have a fat monitor in the schools. I mean, I think parents are completely able to come forward when, as you've both said, there are really acute cases that have a medical underlying problem, be it mental health or physical health. Fair dues. But this fat camp thing, I just think it's more of the obsession with our private lives.
Well, and also I suspect that really and truly, it's about time people start taking responsibility for what they're putting in their mouths. But whilst we're on the issue of health, have a listen to this. The renowned painter David Hockney has revealed he's bored of wellness. So much so that the 84-year-old posted this picture of some beer mats that he had bought, saying exactly that. He went on to say he's still smoking and enjoying it enormously, has never been to the gym in his life, and he slammed the whole concept of wellness as ridiculous. So, panel, do you agree? Is being healthy boring, Laurie?
Yes.
Yes. Look, looking after yourself is something that will be good for you, obviously, and also for other people around you, right? Because it means that you will be healthier for longer, which is a matter that your kids will care about if you've got them, the rest of your family, ultimately the National Health Service, because you're not burdening that, right? There's a difference between caring for yourself, which I think we kind of agree with, and then the wellness industry as a concept that's pushing fads on us, certain ideas that we're bombarded with on social media, creating this idea of certain quick fixes to have proper physical and mental health. And I think that's the problem here, right? It's, you know, Hockney is smoking and, you know, that's his decision. He's 84, that's fine. But, you know, smoking is a very bad thing in society and for lots of people and causes a lot of ill health. The problem, I bet what he is really sick of is this wellness industry that's sort of shoved down our throats with all of these often fads, I mean, bordering on scams and stuff. And that's the issue. And it's, we were talking about obesity just now. It's this idea that there's a quick fix to be able to have proper, balanced mental and physical health, and there isn't. But people need to be given the enabling conditions where they can have it, and you can't find that on Instagram.
There's a lot of young people showing off their wellness, and I'm thinking, what, you're 22? Let's see when you get to my age. I'm double that. Let's see if you look like me then.
Well, you look great, Nana, I must
you.
say. And I don't think you'd be obsessed with the wellness thing. I think it's a really repulsive. I'm so with David Hockney on this. Good on you, mate, smoking at 84. I think I might take smoking up if I get to 80. I managed to stop at the beginning of the pandemic because I couldn't go to France for the cheap cigs, so I had to. But I'm good on him because quality of life rather than quantity is my philosophy. And I think this wellness stuff, which is wholly me, narcissistic, let's all examine ourselves and, you know, be obsessed with what I'm thinking and all about me, rather than get out there and live life to the full, is unhealthy. I think wellness could make you ill.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Kerry's point to some extent. I think there's also, we were talking about this earlier, there's a tendency for some companies to have, you know, in the workplace, they have the wellness area and they spend all this money on that in lieu of giving staff an actual decent pay rise so they could actually live a healthy and well a life. But I mean, on the other hand, I think it's good to be healthy. I think I used to be quite unhealthy. I used to smoke. I used to eat more junk food. And nowadays I have more energy because I've packed that stuff in. So I am actually happier now, living the wellness life, I guess, just with none of the woo-woo or the or sitting in the wellness area meditating.
Well, I should listen. I can't wait to hear what you think about veganism then. Don't talk about the vegans. Well, there's a lot of people who are going on about veganism as well, which I find somewhat irritating. Almost as though they've got a sort of, I don't know, a hotline to God with their great healthy food, instead of actually looking at it, and certain elements of veganism aren't actually that great if you don't know what you're doing. But the wellness industry, though, I think, do you remember during the pandemic, you couldn't get one of those, you couldn't get a bike, you couldn't get, the fitness equipment had vanished, everyone was doing fitness in their homes. I mean, well, how was the pandemic for you in terms of fitness?
Well, I certainly walked more, and at the beginning when we were fully locked down, not so amazing. I think in general for health, obviously it had an impact. We've heard people talking a lot about mental health and things. But I quickly want to touch on James' point here about,
it's going to have to be really quick.
About pay and other
You've got
things.
About 20 seconds.
Those deeper things about the economy also impact our health, and we can change them. Things like pay and conditions, we have to think of them in terms of health now.
We have to think of them in terms of health. Agreed?
Yes, of course.
Just as well. And you? No, you don't agree.
No.
I'm not going to wait. We haven't got time for this one.
More pay, less obsession with wellness. Go David Hockney.
Yeah, well, listen, a lot of people are obsessed with fads. I've got to say a big thank you to my fabulous panel, Kerry Dingle, also James Bloodworth and Laurie Laybourne-Langton. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as ever. And thank you to you for your company. Very briefly, Peter on email says, poor people are not victims of obesity. They're victims of the social system that relies on government instead of parenting. Well, that's it from me. Michelle is back tomorrow. At the top of the hour is Nigel Farage. I'm back on Friday at 4. I'll see you then. Goodbye. Enjoy.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good evening. Skies will start to clear overnight, which will allow a brighter day for many of us tomorrow with a bit of sunshine. There will be a slightly fresher feel, though, thanks to a cold front introducing cooler conditions, but not especially cold, just fresher than it has been. This weather front is also bringing some outbreaks of rain, particularly to Scotland through this evening, but as it sinks southwards, it really is weakening. So really just a band of cloud with some light rain and drizzle across northern England and Wales. Following on, there will be lots of showers overnight for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, some snow likely over the tops of the hills and staying very gusty here as well. As skies clear further south, temperatures will drop well down into single figures. But although it'll be a fresher start to Wednesday, it should be a brighter start as well. Certainly across the Midlands, East Anglia, much of southern England, South Wales, sunny spells for most of the day. Cloudy skies further north, a few showers over northwest England, but they fizzle out, as should the showers across Northern Ireland. We'll keep some going across western Scotland for most of the day, and still pretty gusty here also. As I said, a slightly cooler feel, temperatures not as high. There will be a brisk breeze blowing, but those numbers are still